When a billionaire takes his disabled wife out for a quiet dinner, a young waiter whispers something that makes her burst into tears. What he said, it's something no one at that table will ever forget. Silverware clinked softly through the dimly lit restaurant. Valencia wasn't the kind of place where people came to be seen. It was where the wealthy went to disappear for a while. The lighting was warm, the tables far apart, and the waitstaff trained to be present, but invisible. That evening, Richard Blake walked in with his wife, Emily. He walked beside her as she rolled slowly in her sleek black wheelchair, her posture elegant, her hands folded neatly in her lap. A silk scarf covered her shoulders, and her eyes moved quietly across the room, taking in the low hum of quiet conversations. Eckerd held the door open, even as two waiters rushed to do it for him. He didn't let go of the wheelchair handles until they reached their table in the far corner by the window. His movements weren't rushed. They were practiced and gentle, born not from habit, but from love. People looked, not at who they were, but at how he looked at her. Emily had been in the chair since the accident 6 years ago. A rainy night, a drunk driver, a twist of fate. But tonight, she looked at peace, even a little excited. Her silver earrings caught the candlelight, and she leaned into Richard as they sat down. "I'm glad we came," she said softly, her voice calm and warm. Richard smiled. "You deserve this. A night without questions, without reminders." The waiter assigned to their table was young, probably no older than 20. His name tag read, Tom. His apron was slightly wrinkled, and he gripped the menu a bit too tightly, as if scared he might drop it. But his smile was genuine, and when he approached their table, his voice didn't tremble. "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Blake. It's an honor to serve you tonight." Richard gave a polite nod. Emily smiled at him, and something in her gaze made Tom pause for half a second before he handed over the menus. Throughout the evening, Tom was attentive, but careful not to hover. He brought sparkling water without being asked. He noticed when Emily's hands were cold and offered a small napkin-wrapped stone from the warmers they kept in the kitchen. Most would have missed that detail. As the meal progressed, Richard and Emily spoke in low tones. About art, about how quiet the restaurant was tonight, about a painting Emily wanted to buy from a local artist. They didn't talk about hospitals, or chairs, or surgeries. They were just a couple. When dessert was ordered, dark chocolate mousse with a caramel glaze, Tom returned with a silver tray and a strange kind of stillness in his eyes. He placed the plates gently on the table, then, for a moment, hesitated. His eyes lingered on Emily. Then, as if pulled by something stronger than reason, he bent slightly, not to pour water, not to adjust a napkin, but to whisper something in her ear. It wasn't long, just a few words, but enough to make her freeze. Richard, sitting directly across, caught the moment instantly. His smile faded, and his back straightened. "Emily?" he asked, his tone tight. Emily blinked. Her hands trembled slightly on her lap. Then her eyes welled up, and to Richard's confusion, she began to cry. Not out of pain, but something else, something deeper. Before Richard could ask again, Emily reached across and took Tom's hand, and softly said, "You need to hear this too." Richard's eyes narrowed. His hand instinctively moved to Emily's shoulder, protective, unsure of what had just happened. The waiter, Tom, stood frozen, his hand still gently held by Emily, who now looked at him with a mix of disbelief and something warmer, softer. "Emily," Richard said again, more firmly this time. "What did he say?" But Emily didn't answer right away. Her breathing was shallow, her voice caught between shock and emotion. She looked at Tom, searching his face, as if trying to match it with a memory buried somewhere deep inside her past. Tom shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of the attention. Had he crossed a line? "I'm sorry," he whispered, pulling his hand back slightly, but Emily wouldn't let go. She shook her head gently, her lips trembling. "No," she said softly. "Don't apologize." Richard leaned in, his voice calm but demanding. "Emily, please." She finally looked at her husband, eyes still glossy. He said something that I never thought I'd hear again. Tom finally found the courage to speak. "I didn't mean to make her upset, sir. I just recognized her, not by her name, not at first, by her voice." Richard raised an eyebrow. Her voice. Tom nodded. When she said thank you earlier, I remembered it. I haven't heard it in over a decade, but I knew that voice. I just had to be sure. Emily blinked, stunned. How? How could you remember that? Tom hesitated, then took a slow breath before speaking. When I was 8, I was dying. The table went still. Even the soft piano in the restaurant seemed to fade into the background. Tom continued. I had this rare autoimmune condition. No one could figure it out. My parents were broke. We didn't have insurance. Every hospital turned us away. Except one. He looked at Emily, his voice trembling now. I remember a woman in a white coat kneeling by my bed. She didn't treat me like a patient. She treated me like I mattered. She stayed late, brought me snacks. She read to me. And one day when I asked if I was going to die, she said, "Not on my watch." Emily's hand went to her mouth. Her eyes widened. Tom looked straight at her. That was you. You were that doctor, Dr. Emily Blake. Richard stared at them both. You never told me about this, Emily. Emily was speechless. Her mind was racing, flipping through faces, charts, cases. And then, suddenly, she remembered. A small boy with hollow cheeks, big eyes, fragile arms, and that ridiculous dinosaur toy he never let go of. Tommy, she whispered. Tom's smile wavered as his own tears welled up. You saved me when no one else would. I promised myself, if I ever saw you again, I'd thank you. Emily pressed her hands to her mouth, tears spilling over. Richard looked at her, then at Tom, his disbelief melting into quiet awe. No one else in the restaurant knew what had just happened in that quiet corner, but in that moment, everything had changed. A whisper, a memory, a connection neither of them ever expected to resurface. And for the first time in years, Emily wasn't just seen as the woman in the wheelchair. She was remembered as a hero. Silence lingered like a blanket over the table. Richard leaned back in his chair, still processing everything. Emily wiped her tears, her hands trembling as she looked at Tom again, not as a stranger, but as a part of her past she never thought she'd find. She reached for her glass of water, but Richard gently took it and placed it in her hands, his gaze never leaving Tom. Why didn't you ever say anything earlier? He asked, not accusing, just confused. Tom looked down. Because I wasn't sure. I mean, what are the odds? I never knew your name, not your full name. I was just a scared kid in a hospital bed. But when I heard her voice tonight, it hit me like a wave. That feeling, that comfort. He paused, searching their faces. You were the first person who ever told me I mattered. Emily held back a sob, her fingers now tightly clasped around the glass. Tom continued. After I got better, everything changed. My parents, they tried to thank the hospital, but they couldn't afford even a follow-up visit. We moved a few times. I thought I'd never find you, but I kept the promise. Richard's stern expression melted as he turned to Emily. You never talked about the kids you treated. You always said you didn't like to get attached. Emily gave a faint, tearful smile. I didn't. Not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much. Every time I lost one, it broke me. So when I saved one, I think I tried to forget, just to protect myself. Tom gently reached into his apron and pulled out a small, worn photo from his wallet. He unfolded it carefully. It showed a thin boy holding a plastic dinosaur with two tired-looking parents and a woman in a white coat kneeling beside them. Emily gasped. I asked the nurse to take this, Tom said. I've carried it ever since. That's you. That's the day you told me I was going to be okay. Richard leaned closer to look. The woman in the picture was unmistakably Emily, years younger, standing with that same calm strength, unaware that this single moment would be remembered forever by the boy in the hospital bed. You saved him, Richard whispered. Emily nodded slowly. I saved a lot of children, but I never thought one of them would find me again like this. Tom smiled, but his eyes were still wet. I work 2 jobs now. I'm saving up for med school. I want to be a doctor too. Not just because of you, but because of how you made me feel. I want to give that to someone else someday. Richard looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood up from his seat. Emily looked up, confused. Richard? Without a word, Richard walked around the table and pulled Tom into a hug. A full, real, emotional hug that took Tom by surprise. "Thank you," Richard said quietly, his voice cracking, "for reminding her of who she is, for showing me who she's been all along." The restaurant staff paused from afar, unsure what was happening. A few nearby guests turned their heads, sensing something important, but not daring to interrupt. Emily, wiping her eyes again, looked at both of them. "This is why I became a doctor," she said softly. "To help even one child like him. That's always been enough for me." But Richard wasn't done. He turned to Tom and said, "Sit, eat dessert with us." Tom looked shocked. Sir, I can't. I'm still working." "You are off the clock," Richard interrupted. "Right now. Sit down." Emily nodded, her face glowing through the tears. "Please, Tom." Slowly, almost nervously, Tom pulled out the empty chair and sat. It was the first time he'd ever sat at a table like this. Not as a server, but as a guest. The three of them ate together, talked, and laughed. Emily asked about his classes, his goals. Richard asked what kind of doctor he wanted to be. And Tom, still a bit overwhelmed, answered every question with honest passion. By the end of the meal, Richard reached into his pocket, pulled out a small black leather notebook, and wrote something down. Then he looked at Tom and said the words that made the young man freeze. "You don't need to wait anymore. I'll fund your education." Tom's mouth fell open. "Wait, what?" Emily smiled at him through proud tears. "He means it." Richard nodded. "A full ride, start med school, no more double shifts. Just focus on becoming the doctor you're meant to be." Tom shook his head slowly, stunned. I don't even know what to say." "Then don't," Richard said. "Just make us proud." And for the first time in his life, Tom realized that his dream wasn't just a fantasy anymore. It was happening. That night, I stayed with Tom. He didn't sleep when he got home. He kept replaying the conversation, the hug, the dessert, the moment Richard said he'd fund his education. It felt surreal, like he had walked into work as a waiter and walked out as someone else entirely. The next morning, Tom received a call from a private number. It was Richard's assistant. Everything had already been arranged. The tuition, living expenses, even books. It was real. It was happening. A week later, Tom sat outside a university admissions office with a fresh folder in his lap, still half in disbelief. He hadn't even told his parents yet. He didn't know how. He just stared down at the scholarship form with a trembling hand. At the top, in bold letters, the Emily Blake Future Healer Scholarship. His throat tightened. He blinked quickly, trying not to cry in a hallway full of students. The words stared back at him. Not just money, but a legacy. Her name, now forever tied to his future. Inside, Richard had made arrangements for a private mentorship as well. "Emily will guide you," he'd told him during a follow-up call. "She's ready, and I think, maybe, she needs this as much as you do." Tom walked out of that building that day with more than an acceptance letter. He walked out with purpose. A few weeks later, he arrived at the Blakes' home, not the mansion in the headlines, a quiet house just outside the city, private, surrounded by trees. Emily was waiting for him on the porch, her wheelchair beside a stack of books. She waved. "I thought you might need these." Tom smiled and jogged up the steps, immediately helping her with the books. "Thank you. I still can't believe all this." Emily shrugged gently. "Neither can I." They sat for hours that day, talking medicine, life, ethics, pain, and healing. Tom took notes, asked questions, and sometimes just listened. But what struck him most was how real she was, how she didn't care about attention or recognition. She just wanted him to be ready for what lay ahead. At the end of the day, she said something that stayed with him. "You'll have moments where it all feels too much, where the pain around you is louder than anything else. That's when you remember the whisper, the quiet voice that says, 'You're here for a reason.' Hold on to that." Tom nodded slowly. "Is that what you held on to?" She looked away for a second, her voice low. "After the accident, I lost it. I thought the world didn't need me anymore. But then you showed up and reminded me I never stopped being who I was. I just forgot." They sat in silence after that. Not awkward, just peaceful. By the time Tom left, he had a full binder of notes, a list of recommended reading, and something even more powerful: belief. Not just in medicine, not just in his future, but in the strange, impossible beauty of life. How one whisper could ripple through time and change everything. As he walked down the porch steps, Emily called after him. "One more thing, Tom." He turned. She smiled. "You're not just my student, you're my second chance." Tom didn't know what to say, so he just nodded, the lump in his throat growing again. But deep inside, he knew his journey had just begun. 1 year later, a news segment flickered on the television in a quiet hospital lobby. A young intern in a white coat, barely in his 20s, was walking through the hallways of a renowned teaching hospital. Confidence, focused, kind. "Meet Tom Reeves," the anchor's voice said, "the first recipient of the Emily Blake Scholarship, a former waiter with dreams too big for his pocket, but not too big for his heart." Tom didn't watch the segment live. He was too busy. He was helping a child with a broken arm stay calm while the attending doctor worked. His tone was steady, soft, almost like a whisper. "You're brave," he said, holding the child's hand. "You'll be okay. I promise." That whisper meant something. It always would. Back at the same restaurant where it had all started, a small brass plaque had been placed near the table by the window. The table where Richard, Emily, and Tom had once sat, not as strangers, but as something closer to family. The plaque read, "One whisper changed a life." Most diners passed it without noticing, but those who stopped to read it sometimes asked the staff what it meant. The staff always smiled. "It's a long story," they'd say, "but a beautiful one." Emily, now mentoring 2 more students under the scholarship, had changed too. Her spark had returned. The woman who once believed her purpose had ended now found herself more alive than ever, guiding young hearts into a field that desperately needed compassion. One afternoon, she visited a lecture hall, entering quietly in her wheelchair. At the podium stood Tom, now not just a student but a speaker, giving a talk on empathy in medicine. When he spotted her, he paused. His voice softened. "I wouldn't be here," he said to the room, "if it weren't for a woman who didn't even know she'd saved me." The audience turned toward Emily. Applause filled the room. Later that night, as Tom walked her to her car, she looked up at him. "You're doing it, Tom. You're making the whisper louder. You're turning it into something the world can hear." Tom looked at her, eyes steady. "I'll never forget it, Emily. Not the words, not the moment. It changed everything." And somewhere far from flashing cameras or public applause, Richard watched quietly from a bench, away from the crowd, hands in his coat pockets, eyes wet. He didn't need recognition. He just needed to know that kindness still had a place in the world. That one moment, one whisper, one dinner, had become something greater than any of them had imagined. One whisper, one dinner, one life forever changed. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes in second chances. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of human connection.